From Meditation 17 by John Donne. All mankind is of one author and is one volume. When one man dies, one chapter is not torn out of the book, but translated into a better language, and every chapter must be so translated. As therefore the bell that rings to a sermon calls not upon the preacher only, but upon the congregation to come, so this bell calls us all. But how much more me, who am brought so near the door by this sickness? No man is an island, entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. Any man's death diminishes me, because I am involved in mankind, and therefore never send to know for whom the bell tolls, it tolls for thee. From No Man is an Island, by Thomas Merton. Only the man who has had to face despair is really convinced that he needs mercy. Those who do not want mercy never seek it. It is better to find God on the threshold of despair than to risk our lives in a complacency that has never felt the need of forgiveness. A life that is without problems may literally be more hopeless than one that always verges on despair. From the Bloodstream Sermon by Bodhidharma, translated by Red Pine. The mind's capacity is limitless, and its manifestations are inexhaustible. Seeing forms with your eyes, hearing sounds with your ears, smelling odors with your nose, tasting flavors with your tongue. Every movement or state is all your mind. At every moment where language can't go, that's your mind. So how we doing? Day 2. We've been serenaded by the stonemasons doing their thing out front, and I'm happy to say it seems to be an extended engagement all week long. So I will forget to drink water during this talk, so please feel free to wiggle around and adjust your posture as you need to, but make it count. So, this incredible potpourri of color that we have out here, this wonderful display from nature, it reminds me of Golden-Wind 2018, when I first moved in here for a residency period that would last about 4 years, and had decided to request ordination from Shinge-roshi, who, as most of you know, was our abbot at the time. And on the eve of Golden-Wind-Sesshin, I was tasked by Juyo, who was one of the senior residents at the time, to go to Monticello and procure brown paint and bananas. I didn't ask. So on the drive there, it's fairly late in the evening, and there is this wonderful swirl of color around me. The wind is whipping around my car, and the leaves are all over the place. And even as I'm going about my business and I have the window rolled down, it's this incredible crisp autumn air, the same kind of air that we have outside now. And I felt ineffably like this was it. This was the way it should be. This was right. And there was a feeling for me of exaltation that I had come through the other side of something, and had reached where I was always meant to be. So I reached Monticello, and I went to Home Depot, rolled in, got the paint cans, rolled into ShopRite, got as many bananas as I could carry. This loathsome ritual could now commence. And on my way back, by this point it's probably about 8:30 p.m. It's very, very dark outside. And I'm on a road that at the time I had rarely traversed. I never really drove to Monticello. All of a sudden, all the lights on my dash started blinking on and off. Every single one of them. The speedometer died. The fuel gauge died. So I had no frame of reference whatsoever. I had no idea, no way of knowing how fast I was going, how much gas was left in the tank, whether I, at this point, could even make it back. I didn't know what was going to happen. And because it was so dark outside, beyond the narrow range of my headlights, it was like hurtling through space. So somehow I managed to make it up to the gatehouse, turned the car off, went inside to talk to Karen for a few minutes, who told me that he could hear the cries of my wallet from all the way in Monticello. And after we talked for a while, I came back outside, turned the key in my ignition, and the engine was dead. And you know what that's called, right? Karma. I couldn't help but feel that I had invited this upon myself by making the intention to surrender everything and enter into this practice with as much wholehearted devotion as I could muster. And even now, what stands out to me about that experience was not being in the car and how uncertain that all was, but that brilliant blue sky on the drive to Monticello and all the leaves blowing through the air. And the feeling after it had all gone down that calamity is temporary. And somehow things just take care of themselves. You don't always get what you want, but you get what you need. And maybe in my case here, a little bit of what I asked for, whether I realized it or not. So 6 years later, it's a wonderful privilege to be here with everyone, speaking in front of you and sharing in this autumn environment here at Daibasatsu Zendo once again. So we have three characters in these quotes that I've selected here for this talk. And I don't want to go too deeply into biographical details. Bodhidharma, of course, we know, thanks to Chigan Roshi's wonderful introduction yesterday. And Thomas Merton, I think most of us have probably at least heard of, the European-born American Trappist monk, who actually, maybe you don't know, has a connection with the Zen Study Society through his work with D.T. Suzuki in forging a dialogue between Christianity and Zen Buddhism. And Merton, in fact, actually died in a freak accident. He was in Japan, having just finished a conference on Christianity and Zen with D.T. Suzuki, and the electric fan perched just above his bathtub fell into the tub while he was in it, and he was electrocuted. Some say that he was assassinated due to his strong views on the Vietnam War. He was very strongly anti-war and against nuclear proliferation. Perhaps we'll never know the truth, but that is what happened. And he, I've always felt, has hovered over this building, although he never would have had any way of knowing about this place, of course. He died before it was ever an idea. But John Donne is a figure you may not realize that you know. You probably recognize the quote, "For whom the bell tolls." You might know Ernest Hemingway's novel. You may even have stumbled upon this quote in English 201 in college or whatever it is. And again, I don't want to go too deeply into his history or even necessarily his poetic work, but he is a fascinating figure. His dates, first of all, were 1572 to 1631. He was a contemporary of William Shakespeare, among many other giants of the English early modern literary scene. And one of the most well-known exemplars of the metaphysical poetic tradition, as it was only became known later. But he, in his poetic work, was very rebellious, very much a sensualist, and possessed an incredible intuition for metaphor. And though I won't read any of his work today, I strongly encourage you to seek him out. He really is a wonderful example of the human imagination at work in tandem with the human heart. And he's all the more interesting because he is probably equally well known for being a preacher, although he never wanted to be one. He entered the clergy late in life, and he probably did so because he had no other options. He was virtually destitute by that point in his life. He was, I believe, in his late 30s at the time, was unable to find work as a writer, and had never met with a great deal of success, at least on his terms, as he would define it. He always felt like an outsider. And there are those who argue that because he became, as a preacher, a very conservative and authoritarian figure. He was a Calvinist, and many of his sermons are fairly replete with castigations against, figures that he considered to be lower than himself, let's put it that way. And there are those who feel that because he had experienced this rebellious outsider lifestyle, more or less, that when he finally became well known as a preacher and found that kind of success, he sort of took out his past trauma on others who were convenient scapegoats. Again, we don't necessarily know his psyche, but it's worth mentioning that as a poet, he was one of the first major Western poets to really delve deeply into his psyche, the nature of his own mind, and put it to pen. He was one of the first to really do that in poetic form. And it's one thing that is very evident in his sermons, if you ever care to seek them out. So the passage that I've chosen is from a longer book with the very catchy title, Devotions Upon Emergent Occasions and Several Steps in My Sickness. And the book itself is a series of reflections. He had recovered from a long illness, and in this illness had come face to face with what he considered his internal sinfulness. And this led him to a kind of awakening, a kind of religious fervor that he had not previously possessed, and led to some of his most well-known prose works, at least in our time. In his time, very few of his prose works were in publication. So you may find some resonance with case 16 of the Mumonkan, which some of you know. Umon said, "The world is vast and wide. Why do you put on your 7-piece robe at the sound of the temple bell?" Like all churches, we have bells. And like it or not, this is a kind of church. This is a kind of worship. I'm sorry to tell you, and I'm sorry to admit to myself, this is a kind of sermon. When these bells call to us, why do we respond? When the Shinrei wakes us up in the morning, and Jim goes around rattling the bell in our faces, why do we go to the Zendo? Why do we come here in the first place? Perhaps like me, 6 years ago, driving to Monticello, right before Golden-Wind-Sesshin, you find that there is no choice. There's not even a thought of there being a choice. We have many bells here. There's a bell. There's one up on the hill. Here's a bell. Here's a bell. Over there's a bell. On the altar, on the left, there's a bell. And in various ways, these bells call us to assemble as a sangha, as a congregation, but I think more importantly, as members of the human family. They call us to recognize not simply our independence as individuals, although perhaps there is something in that, but our fundamental interdependence. And I think all the proof we need, we could feel as we chanted Daihishu just a moment ago. As Ino-san rang the small bell, the shoke, and the daike, doing this whole syncopated pattern here, and we offered ourselves to this chant beautifully, without a thought. We supported each other in harmony in the same way that we do with everything that we do. John Donne says no man is an island, or perhaps no person is an island. Well, just look around. Really, look around at the people around you, this wonderful group assembled here. All of us together in this space, as members of this sangha, this community, supporting and caring for one another, creating and holding this space together to investigate our own mind. None of us are apart from one another, not even in the slightest possible way. Here in this Sesshin atmosphere, we are all stewards of the ship of Dharma. We hold each other. We are present with each other. We cry together. We chant. We eat. We do everything together. Even when we have those rare moments of personal time, we go into this personal time together, separately but together. And we retain this clarity of mind that we cultivate in Zazen to further expand and deepen our awareness in this space. Now, in this quote from Meditation 17 from the Devotions, John Donne speaks about a sickness. He says, "How much more me, who am brought so near the door by this sickness?" So the illness that he probably had, he was actually sick and in a physical way, was probably typhus. We don't know for sure. He didn't know at the time either. But in the context of the reading, what he was actually talking about in this piece was the sickness of thinking that this bell that sounds the call of humanity, that resounds within all of us, the sickness of thinking that this bell does not apply to us. Oh, not me. I'm over here doing my thing. I don't have anything to do with what's out here. When we feel isolated or separated or lonely, and we all do, we're human beings, something in us calls out to find relief. We chanted just a moment ago in the Song of Zazen, not knowing how near the truth is, we seek it far away. What a pity. And yet, the very fact of our chanting this means that we have found our togetherness. We have found our unity. We've encountered this practice, this Dharma. We are encountering our lives together. And so somehow, I think that in their natural course, again, things somehow work themselves out. By the fact of our suffering, by the fact of our feeling isolated, somehow we hear the call of the bell, and we come here to this zendo in each other's company and go deeply into this together. When we look at the world today, And it's unavoidable. You can't hide from it. Things that go on all across the globe. The war, hunger, manifold forms of suffering, physical, mental, emotional. It seems more prevalent than ever. Of course, in the vast scope of history, who can really say? Perhaps to us at this time it just seems that way. It's always been that way. But it's this fragile human condition that binds us together. And that allows us to feel kinship with one another. To say that in your suffering, I see myself. And to say that we share a common affliction, life, as a human being. We hear the cry of our fellow human beings, just as much as we celebrate our joys and triumphs as societies and cultures and as individuals. We can't ignore the suffering in this world. And again, the proof of that is that we're here. If we didn't feel that, if we didn't understand that, we couldn't seek the truth in this way. So that's everything. I could stop there. But this is the tolling of the bell. It's a call toward responsibility and fellowship toward our fellow sentient beings, not just humans. We have 2 cats and sometimes a dog in the building. There's a dog in the Beecher house also. All kinds of critters on the mountain. We bring all of them into the sphere of our awareness and of our compassion. And we do this because we must. There's no other choice. There's no going back from here. You might leave the zendo at the end of this session or in the middle of this session, but you can't avoid the call of that bell. I'm sorry to tell you. And there's another meaning to this bell. In any church, the bell that summons us to worship, to the service, is often the same bell that calls us to the funeral service. Each and every one of us is going to die. Hey! That's really wonderful news. Because with that reality in place, there's no need to defend anything. We can listen to the bell and heed its call without a worry. Wonderful. And as I think about the hurricane that's devastated the southern United States, including my home state of Florida, and the hurricane that I've been out of the loop with the timeline of things, it might be bearing down already, but the second hurricane that is about to strike Florida and the other Atlantic states, I'd venture to guess that the people whose homes were destroyed, whose family and friends were affected by the devastation, I'm sure they would prefer that not to have happened. But all these individuals now have no choice but to integrate this reality of hurricane devastation into the course of their lives. They've lost their homes, their communities, loved ones. It's going to happen again. During this kesse, and last kesse as well, we have been reading a text by Nancy Mujo Baker Roshi, for whom we also chant in our Kanzeon service, a book called Opening to Oneness, which is an examination of the Zen precepts. She has a wonderful passage where she asks us to take responsibility in a very radical way. She gives the example of a hurricane. Well, she could have given the example of a hurricane, but she gives the example of an earthquake. And she asks us to think, Can I take responsibility for the earthquake that destroyed my home? This natural disaster. I know my footsteps aren't that heavy. How could I possibly cause this earthquake? But radical responsibility. What if I said to myself, felt deeply within my heart, I am responsible for this? And if we look at this hurricane, the reality of things, we can see that this is no metaphor. We can really say to ourselves as human beings, I am responsible for this. I am responsible for what happens next. I have no choice in this matter. The die has been cast. What happens now? What kind of life do I lead? And how do I extend my compassion, my awareness, everything that I have, give it all away for the sake of my fellow human beings, my fellow sentient beings, this planet that we all share? So there's no time to waste. It begins now, right where we sit, right where we stand. Not next week, not tomorrow, not after this talk. It begins now. And we must feel this. Because if we don't, it's simply avoiding the essential fact. Welcome to the only game in town. So, the tolling of this bell is heard right in the midst of our own activity as a Sangha. Literally, as a matter of fact. This guy over here. And speaking of the officers, actually, we have a whole host of new officers in this room for this sesshin. People who are dedicating themselves to throwing themselves away and just going fully into new tasks and into uncertainty, perhaps having little to no frame of reference of their own. And it's important to see how this is not separate from hearing this bell. For example, have you noticed the excellent job that Jisha-san is doing? If you haven't, it's probably because she's doing an excellent job. You probably noticed, I'm sure of it, the amazing arrangement of cake pops that greeted you when you arrived to the sesshin and that we had for the evening snack yesterday. This beautiful and really painstaking labor arranged just so, and it took a long time, just so that we could taste this autumn for ourselves. And anybody who has ever been Jisha knows how nerve-wracking it can be. I mean, the announcements alone, you got to be clear, you got to be clear, precise, loud. Project yourself without identifying as the center of attention. How do you think I feel? I could point to Jokei-san, Ryan, who's here not just for his first session as a Jokei, but his first session period, and has just begun his first Kessei a few weeks ago. That's courage. That's throwing yourself into the unknown. Our Tenzo for the session, Annie, was here for Introduction to Zen, and some of you were here for that as well. You may have met her. And she decided to come back to prepare delicious food for us, give me a chance to be out of the Tenzo for a session. I really relish that. And she has no frame of reference for all the weird stuff that we do around here. The gongs and the way we set up the meals and busho. I mean, it's all entirely unfamiliar. So this whole, even just the past couple of days, has been a crash course for her in the same way that all of these new officers have had the same crash course. I could point to every single one of you and say what a wonderful job you're doing. Regardless of how, quote unquote, well you're performing your duties, everybody is giving of themselves fully and completely, and that's the point. Some of you know that Nadia is a commercial pilot for a living when she's not here. And when I asked her once, why did you decide to take up flying? What made you want to learn how to fly? And she said, because I was afraid of flying. That's courage! That, in the most real way possible, is confronting the reality of life and death. And we should all have this spirit. We do all have this spirit when we look at ourselves, when we open to ourselves. In session, we have plenty of opportunities to pat ourselves on the back. Hey, Muken, you really knocked it out of the park with this one. Good job. But there are plenty more opportunities to feel like shit. To feel inadequate, defeated, humbled, tired, exhausted, in pain, miserable. And so it's a rich opportunity, a wonderful gift, to be patient with ourselves and with one another, and to be at peace with what we perceive as our shortcomings and our imperfections, and to feel that out of these feelings of shortcoming and imperfection grow our sincerity. This is where the heart beats in our practice. It's like the trees who, as we speak, are shedding all of their brilliant plumage. You see it happen in real time. They literally are dropping all their attachments and laying themselves bare until it's just nothing left to defend, nothing to hide, just as they are. Nothing extra. Nothing distracting from the real deal. And so as a Sangha, as a congregation, we support one another, we offer one another a space in which to discover ourselves, who we really are in the midst of this activity, and to dissolve into the continuous activity of Dharma. Chigan Roshi posed the question to us of whether or not this place is designed to be challenging and a pain in the ass. Speaking as the so-called head monk, maybe not. But in a way, I've always felt that the monastery, and Sesshin in particular, are kind of like a meat tenderizer. Lots of opportunities for correction, to receive instruction. When you receive something like that, and any of us might, whether you're an officer or not, be still! Don't stir your food! One bell during sade. Can you feel and understand the pure compassion in that instruction? It's not about you, it's not about me, it's not about the role. It's about waking up and becoming more intimate with what we're doing. To really become one. And it just seems to happen automatically. Typically, for a Dharma talk, we don't have the konsho, the large bell up on the hill there. We reserve that for teisho most of the time. But we had it today. And whether by accident or by design, just exactly perfect. We can literally hear the tolling of the bell that summons us. And without a thought, here we are. So sesshin is an opportunity to take ownership Not of the stories that we tell about ourselves, but of the fact that we have a tendency to tell stories about ourselves. We are throwing ourselves, as Thomas Merton says, onto the mercy of one another. In a way, one could say, into the mercy of the Dharma. Learning to throw everything away and dwell in the tenderness of the open heart that has no limitation, no borders or parameters. This is a process of purification by which we transform our harmful karma and extend this clarified mind, this intention, this heart to the whole universe. So here today, and continuing on into the rest of this week, taking in all of that pain, suffering, joy, everything that we feel, bringing it all in, letting it all come to the surface, creating space to hold it all, letting it all into our belly, letting it all open up, excluding nothing, and then golden wind revealed. What's left is gratitude, generosity, kindness for ourselves and for others, which is really the same thing. And it's a way out of our complacency. Thomas Merton speaks about living a life in complacency with no problems. I'm sure we all got some problems, right? I know I do. And you know, over time, I can honestly say that I've become thankful for the challenges that I've faced, for the opportunity to surrender completely and to welcome mercy. Just be in supplication. Right and wrong, you said, I, me, mine, you, they, it doesn't matter. The point is we're together. We have no reason to set ourselves apart. And we have every reason and every ability to discover that the things that we think are between us don't really exist. So when you receive corrections, as you go about your session, you experience whatever challenges may arise, and into the rest of your lives once you leave here. Don't settle for what you think you are. Oh, well, I guess I'm just not going to get it. You may or you may not. It's almost beside the point. It's about making the best effort to learn to be completely integrated with what is happening. Integrated. Integrity. Right? And when life slaps you in the face, we can say thank you. And rather than beating ourselves up and engaging in self-recrimination and all of the usual song and dance motions that we do, we can see it as an opportunity to expand the horizon of possibility in our lives, transcending our small, limited notions of what we think we are. Take the cap off the bottle, if you will. And so I encourage you going forward, and I encourage myself just the same, sitting in the zendo, in that silence, that palpable atmosphere. Be a fucking warrior. You are a warrior. The world depends on us, on me, on you. This bell can never stop tolling. again and again. So Bodhidharma is here, first of all. He's a little redder and maybe a little larger than he was yesterday. Our boy's growing up. It's through these challenges that we experience that we invite mercy into our hearts and that we sow tenderness that allows us to soften and bring in more and more and more compassion, give away more and more and more compassion, more effort. And when we do this, we can begin to understand more and more that every activity is a gateway to our true mind, beyond that self-limited idea of me and you, this and that. Extending our hearts through our awareness and becoming the vast and beating heart of the Buddha through the work that we do, through our unyielding devotion to this practice of life and death. Now, the residents have heard me make this point ad nauseum, and I will do so again because I have a captive audience, and it bears repeating. If we can see how the atmosphere of the Zendo benefits when we don't simply toss our sutra book behind us and it's kind of at a 45-degree angle. I mean, it's kind of like, yep, this is mine. Yeah, done with that now. But bend down, both hands, neatly arrange it in place. Arrange our seat so that it's not just haphazard, but there's intention there. There's an intention to leave things a little better than we found them, perhaps. When we can go through the world and sow a little more order, create a little more harmony through the subtlety of our awareness, our willingness not to exclude even the smallest detail, then we can begin to see that, yeah, this Zendo atmosphere, this silence and stillness that pierces the heart, it doesn't end when we get off the cushion. It's always here, all the time. It's always available. Bodhidharma talks about the sense experiences, where language can't go, that's your mind. And of course, Chigan Roshi spoke very beautifully about non-duality yesterday. And Bodhidharma, it's a very interesting quotation to me. I'll pull it out again and I'll read it again, if I can find it here. The mind's capacity is limitless, and its manifestations are inexhaustible. Seeing forms with your eyes, hearing sounds with your ears, smelling odors with your nose, tasting flavors with your tongue, every movement or state is all your mind. At every moment where language can't go, that's your mind. Through the function of things, we can encounter what is beyond conception. And as I read this passage, I hear you saying, wait, Muken, don't we chant no seeing, no hearing, no smelling, no tasting, no touching, no thinking? Yes, we do. And I've always felt in this translation by Red Pine, I haven't compared it to any of the other ones that are out there of Bodhidharma's Bloodstream Sermon. I've always felt that he's kind of laying a trap here when he says, where language can't go, that's your mind. Because even this talk that I'm giving now has fundamental value, not merely for its content, and don't believe anything that I say. Find out for yourself. But in the fact that it brought us here together. And we are speaking and listening there is this exchange, there is this presence, there is this support, and this feeling in the air. And we're going to take that with us. And so the situation allows us to go deeper. It almost doesn't matter what is said. Even my rambling about whatever it is. Beyond the content, this is a meeting. Mind meeting mind. And here we return back to the fundamental point. This bell calls us to recognize our responsibility to ourselves, to the human situation in which we find ourselves born. This is not an abstraction. And when I say that it begins now, this is concrete. During Kesse, one of the first things that we learn is that when you finished eating, you wash your dish, you put away the food, you dry your dish, and you put them away. You leave no trace that you were ever there. And if possible, leave things a little better than you left them. If you can eat, nourish yourself, then you can sustain the energy to keep going, to maintain the quality of your attention. And if you can wash a dish, then you can recognize that your friend who just came in to eat themselves, to have their own meal, they don't have to deal with the mess that you made. You've been generous enough not to saddle them with something that you've caused. And if you can recognize how that benefits that other person, and in turn benefits you, then you two friends can laugh and say, hey, you know what? This Tenzo is pretty dirty. This dining room could use a dust mop. And you can take care of things a little bit more. And because you've laughed together and shared that experience, when your friend gets down on themselves and they start to struggle, you can console them. You can be present with them. And little by little, more and more, outward and outward, this single effort with pure, clarified mind makes the whole universe squeaky clean. It's not a metaphor. We can't possibly know how our actions affect people, but we can take responsibility for what we do. And we can keep our minds expansive. Place no limitation on what we are able to hold and care for. Or who. Or how. John Donne, in his 10th Holy Sonnet, begins with the line, "Batter my heart, three-personed God. Batter my heart, three-personed God." This three-personed God, Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, or Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. The stonemasons continue their chatter. The leaves continue to fall. And the bell tolls for you. Listen closely.